They weren't allowed to wear anything was put into the gas chambers. The Nazis tortured them and didn't mind hurting the Jewish community. Then the Jewish people that were in the camp were surrounded by barbed wire. The Jewish rights were taken over and they didn't have a say or do anything. During this time, the survivors in this section talk about life before the Holocaust, how it was peaceful. The Nazi Party created the SS unit in their military for hunting down, as in their own words, rats. They're hunting them down by either killing them or putting them in concentration camps. The SS unit was originally established as Adolf Hitler's personal bodyguard unit. It would later become both an elite guard of the Nazi Reich and Hitler's executive force prepared to carry out all security-related duties. Without regard for legal restraint, they encounter anti-Semitic prejudice and discrimination. They talk about the loss of various rights once anti-Jewish decrees established. Some speak of their childhood memories, such as having to leave their homes in Germany to travel to England on their kinder transport. Before the Holocaust and World War II, the British royal government went to Germany to try to discuss peace talks to have a truce around the country of Germany. The Holocaust was when the Nazis came to power in 1933, began to strip the Jewish people of all property and freedom and rights under the law. After German invasion and occupation of Poland in 1939, the Nazis started deporting Jewish people from the Third Reich to parts of Poland, where they created ghettos to separate them from the rest of the population. In 1941, during the German invasion of USSR, the Nazis began in their campaign of extermination in earnest. Nazis spoke about their invasion as a race war between Germany and Jewish people, as well as the Slavic population, the Roma, the concentration camps of the horrifying tortured children in Hitler's concentration camps. The children ranging in the age as young as 2 years old up to the age of 16 years old. They were routinely beaten, starved, and subjected to humiliating and harsh punishments. Forced to work grueling conditions, many of the children, their organism pushed to the limits of endurance, expired from disease and fatigue. The Jewish people in the Nazi military had names for the concentration camps, like prison camp, gas chamber, death camps, killing fields, prisoners of war camp, forced labor, stockade, detention camp, internment camp, and labor camp. There was a concentration camp that was worst thing in the history of all the Holocaust. That camp was called Auschwitz-Birkenau. The estimated deaths was 1,100,000 deaths. The good part about the war was that was the first concentration camp that was destroyed. A point of view of how Alfred Freddie Noller experienced being in a concentration camp. He was born on 17th of April in 1921 in Vienna, Austria, following a series of anti-Semitic attacks on the Viennese Jewish community. In 1938, he left Austria and lived as a refugee in Belgium and France. In his own words, I quote, "We arrived filthy, starving, and terrified, and feeling abandoned from the world. The Nazis did not care about the Jewish community. We were tattooed as numbers. I was no longer Freddie Noller. I was known as 157103. He also recalls from the events of November 9, 1938, when German soldiers staged mass violence against the Jewish communities of Germany. Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia, Freddie Noller was terrified man who barely made it out alive and turned into a different person after he escaped the concentration camp. Like the Jewish people from Germany during the Holocaust, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, whose families came from Japan or looked Japanese, they were all put in concentration camps because the American government thought the Japanese people were spies for the Japanese government in Hawaii. Another example of how people like the Jewish community was treated during World War II was that in the 18th century, Native Americans in the American military were at war and American military had planned to put on diseases and anything that seemed deadly as a peace offering to them and killed many Native Americans in the 18th century.
The consequences were that for the Jewish people, they were split up and the old and young were killed. If the workers were tired, they would die either from execution, hunger, and disease. For example, during the 1700s, 1800s, there was slavery, like the Jewish people in the concentration camps were tattooed, but the slaves were registered as English names and took their culture names and were treated like they were horrible. Also, the Nazis and the owners of the plantations had their pros to having people working for them by force. The difference was during the time in World War II, the slaves were taken from their land and traveled on dirty boats and going through rough waters to America. Then they would be taken away from the families and put into a place which they did not know and had to work for nothing that would do them good. The Jewish people were forced to make weapon parts and equipment during World War II. But during slaves were picking out cotton and other items that could be made for profit. Another consequence during World War II was that the Nazi Party lost in 1945. That was one of their consequences, committing a war crime. The Nazi Party was affected by their consequences, which they had a hard time regaining. The Nazi Party economy was bad because of the industrial and food production, which they weren't fixed until a couple of years after World War II happened.
Overall, that was the outcome and reason behind how Nazi Germany dehumanized the Jewish community during World War II, and that the ways it affected both Germans and Jews. Life was while Hitler was in control with the concentration camps. This has affected many people, especially the targeted people, which was the Jewish community throughout World War II, which they were not treated the same in Germany. The people of Germany did not like the Jewish people because the Nazi Party thought the Jewish people as rats, because the Jewish people were known as unwanted guests. The Holocaust affected the Jewish community in both ways, because the bad part is the innocent people were dying because of the maid trident. It was good because the Jewish community survived something that they shouldn't have happened in the Jewish community. For example, the only reason Christopher Columbus said sail to Americans was because the reason to conquer other lands, which they did not ask for permission. An estimate count about 11 million people remained displaced in Europe in the wake of the Second World War. Of the total number of Europeans, United Nations displaced persons, or UNDPs, more than 8 million were in Germany. In the immediate post-war period, where 6 million foreign civilian workers, 2 million prisoner wars, and somewhere around 700,000 survivors of concentration camps were liberated of the close war. Finally, the survivors of the Holocaust during World War II still remember what they went through and how hard it had to fight for their lives, and they were still surviving and were still spreading the word to them that they should not live, they should live with peace in their life.